Hey guys, welcome back. Robocraft early access coverage. This is episode 6 and I'm Enigmius today, taking a look at a couple of things. We're going to spend a little bit of time, first of all, taking a look at design revisions. This is my rail sled and it's changed since we first built it. And then most of the episode is going to be spent looking at my new flyer. It actually flies as opposed to just floats in the air and irritates me by its lack of maneuverability. And how that does in a couple of matches, because it's really kind of interesting to see. Now, looking at this, I don't want to spend a ton of time on it because we've already looked at it when it was freshly built. One of the main things that you'll be able to do with the vehicle, especially if you're going to be spending a certain amount of time in a given tier, which I recommend, talk about that more momentarily, is to upgrade as new tiers of components are unlocked. So you'll notice that this vehicle has turned pink since the last episode, and that's because pink is the current highest tier of chassis blocks that are available to me. So as I was getting money, we actually had a kind of a nice little bonus weekend where the money was coming in quick and easy. I was replacing the orange blocks with the pink blocks, and then I was taking blocks that weren't orange and replacing them with the orange blocks that I had just replaced with pink blocks, and so on down the line, so that most of the vehicle now is either orange or pink. You can see in the back we've got some teal still, and underneath you can even find some of the green from the tier below that. So we're not fully upgraded, but the places that are most likely to receive incoming fire, I've made a point of upgrading them and putting them into as good a position as I possibly can. I've also upgraded the wheels from the ones we had before. Now we've got like the super slick racing tires, and it looks like by about tier 8 they'll be out about that far. They're not out that far, but you get the idea. They just get thicker and thicker as you tier up. So it was kind of nice to get into some tires that look like they are meant to survive for a little while, even if they aren't. I haven't really worried too much about the armor value based on those tires, and also just a desire to kind of make things look a little bit more slick. I adjusted the positioning of the electroplates, partially to account for the extra width, but partially to close in the gap so that the tires weren't easily hit by, stray SMG fire or plasma splash or things of that nature. So we made some adjustments there. We've added blocks as I've leveled up and been able to add blocks to fill things out. More blocks means more damage you can absorb before critical systems get hit. So I've added a number of blocks to these platforms where the front two railguns are sitting on. The ones here actually look like they're kind of like a hot rod wheel well for the wheels. I like the way that those kind of worked out. And again, they serve a purpose. Anyone shooting in and around the area of the wheels is just as likely to hit this mass of blocks as they are to hit the wheels, and then these will absorb the damage instead of the wheels themselves. And then we also did some adjustments on the back end here. Now, one of the things that I had noticed playing in match after match was that the rear railgun was usually the first one that I lost, and it was actually raised a block above where it is now, and I thought that might have been part of the problem, especially when I like to hide behind like ridges and rises so that I can fire at airborne targets without being so easy to spot and target by plasma cannons and SMGs. But that meant that this guy liked to stick up farther than the rest, which made it a target. So I brought it down, I added some more blocks to the platform that it's sitting on, and kind of did some more detailing underneath. And again, the whole purpose is we're using the angling of the different blocks. You'll notice I use very few cubes in my builds now, very, very few. We're all using the armor core design that I've talked about in the previous 2 episodes. But adding more blocks means I can theoretically absorb more damage before things start to go crazy, and I've noticed it in a big, big way. Compared to how this vehicle performed when it was initially built, relative to how it performs now, it's not an easy vehicle to kill under any circumstances, despite the fact that I'm supposed to be a glass cannon with 3 railguns and not really a whole lot in terms of a hull built around the driver's seat. The driver's seat is still sitting right there out in the open, but it's well protected, it's well covered. Things can still go badly if I'm kind of tilted up on an angle. If I kind of catch a wall badly and someone shoots me and gets a shot right around in here, it can really mess me up. But for the most part, I survive well, I contribute well. Very, very fun. And the key is I've constantly upgraded the vehicle as I go. Now, I mentioned previously the importance of sticking around in a tier. And what happens and I can tell this is what happens by reading in the forums what people talk about, is this is where they're at. Right? They're looking at the tech tree, and then as soon as they see that they've unlocked everything they want out of that tech tree, they want to be in the next tier right away. That's not even a discussion. I've unlocked everything. It's time for me to move up. They almost expect that they should be able to move up. So they start doing things with their builds to kind of push them up into the next tier, adding more weapons, adding more wheels, adding more things that really jack up their vehicle rating to try and get them up into the next tier so they can start earning tech points to buy the next tier of things and unlock them, and then use those to get into the next tier, and on and on and on. What they don't realize is that every time they move up in a tier, boost themselves up into a tier without having spent time to refine their current vehicle, they're screwing themselves over because they show up and their vehicle can't handle it. And then they get frustrated and they start complaining about imbalances and all that other stuff, and it's really just not very helpful. For me, the way I look at it is unlocking all of these goodies is just part of finishing my vehicle for this tier. Not getting to the next tier, finishing my vehicle for this. People are going to disagree, and with your game, you do what you like. I'm just saying, if you're frustrated because you keep moving up into tiers and getting blasted, that's one thing you might want to take a look at, is whether you're rushing it or if you're actually ready to be moving up. So enough of that, enough of the railgun, enough of the rail sled, and the tier talk. Let's go look at my flyer, because it's much more interesting. So this is my flyer. Now, there was a discussion taking place on Reddit, which is where I always seem to have these discussions, about flyers not being very good. They get shot down too easily. They're not very helpful. They're something. I don't know. The thing is, it's not rock, paper, scissors. The developers just did an AMA. They don't want rock, paper, scissors, but they're not afraid of having certain advantages and disadvantages whenever you build a certain vehicle a certain way with certain components. The advantage to being in a flyer is that you can see pretty much the entire battlefield. If you're kind of floating around in the middle, you can see the whole thing. You can see what's going on. You can scout for your team. If you need to be somewhere, if you need to respond to something, you don't have to go around the terrain. You don't have to go up the hill and around the corner and then back down. Like, if you're on a land vehicle, there are certain places you just don't want to go. If you're on a land vehicle and you go into the ice, in the snowy place with the ice lakes, oh man, it's bad news. Flying vehicles can bypass that whole thing. Now, the downside is that if you're of the tendency to kind of rush in a little bit, all eyes are on you. As soon as the first enemy can see you and they spot you for the rest of their team, they've got nothing else to shoot at because all the ground vehicles are too slow. They're moving on the ground. They have to go around all the obstacles to get to where the fighting is. But you just presented yourself as a target, and it's no wonder it's difficult to stay alive in those kinds of circumstances. Another thing is the way flyers are. If you build a very flimsy vehicle and a guy with an SMG can just blow off a wing, you lose control of the vehicle. Like, it has a very dramatic impact on your ability to do what you need to do. If you lose a wheel on a ground vehicle, you can usually still kind of scoot around a little bit. It's a pain in the butt. It's not very easy, but it's definitely a lot easier than losing a wing or a thruster in a flyer. Like, the components on your vehicle as a flyer are far more important to your ability to move around than they are to a ground vehicle. So if your vehicle is prone to losing things very quickly and easily, you're going to feel that in the end result. So one of the things that I decided is that I didn't want to tie an outcome to this particular project. I didn't want to say this is going to be a plasma bomber, it's going to be a whatever. I just wanted it. I'm going to mess around. I'm going to find something that I like. I'm going to try it. I'm going to get a feel for the different configurations. Hours later, moving things around, putting wings on and moving them around, putting thrusters on and moving them around. Lots and lots of trips to the practice map, which I should say is very important, because you don't want to be that guy in the flyer who arrives at a brand new match and the first thing his vehicle does when you're all given control of your vehicles after the countdown is flips upside down and crashes into the ground. You don't want to be that guy. You want to look like you've got it under control and inspire confidence from your team. So this vehicle, you can see, is not small. This is not designed to be a hard target. This is designed to be a robust target. It means if you want to take me out, you're going to have to work for it. And we're going to see that a little bit later. I've already recorded 2 matches where the vehicle takes some damage, and you can sort of see, first of all, how it holds up as it's receiving the damage, and then also the consequences of receiving that damage. And what we've got is we've got 2 of these aerofoils on each side. Now, when I originally planned this vehicle, I had actually intended to have the 2 aerofoils up front with a bunch of thrusters up front. You can see we've got 4 thrusters on the vehicle as well. It didn't work out. The mechanics don't support that. In order to get a vehicle that basically, if I'm holding forward while I'm in flight, the vehicle is a little bit back heavy, so it dips a little bit in the back, but for the most part it flies level. It's not a constant process of adjusting the vehicle in order to get it to go where I want it to go. And that's a big deal. That's a surprisingly big deal, because again, when you start losing components and losing control of the vehicle, if it was already a pain in the butt to fly, you're screwed when it gets even harder. That's one way of looking at it. Now you can see I've invested a certain amount in electroplating around the sides of the underside of the vehicle, because the very underside of the vehicle is where the guns are attached. Now I would have loved to have had a 4th Tier 6 SMG attached to the underside of this vehicle, and in fact I do have one, I think, in my inventory that I could add, but I don't have the CPU, so that's why I don't have it. And I'm also extremely close to moving up into Tier 6 with this vehicle, so that gun would probably be what pushed me over. So this isn't an offensive powerhouse by any stretch of the imagination, but I can irritate the hell out of people, and I can take the business to other flying vehicles, especially the flimsy ones, without too much concern. Now, up top we've got our whole electronics suite. We've got our radar jammer up here, which is actually very, very important to flyers, because you don't want the enemy spotting you effortlessly. You want to make them work for it. You want to make them have to look up and look around in order to see you, and not just be told by their radar system that you're nearby. So the radar jammer is a big deal. We've got our radar here that helps us to spot enemy vehicles that aren't using 5 or 6 radar jammers. And then there's this little guy that just became available in Tier 6. It's a radar receiver. Will it let me? Let's take a look. The Cube Depot, that'll show us. Special, there it is, the radar receiver. And it allows you to see all of the enemies that have been picked up by your friendly teammates. So that's kind of helpful. It's not just what your radar is telling you, it's theoretically what their radar is telling you as well. So that's sort of very, very helpful. You can get a picture of what's down on the ground without having to kind of look around and maybe miss something that's going to start shooting at you, because you don't always have a ton of time to respond. Now, as far as the structure goes, like we've talked about the weapons, we've got the stabilizers in the back, the rudders, before we get any further ahead of ourselves. These are extremely helpful for actually being able to turn the vehicle in a way that makes sense. Like I can pitch up, I can pitch down, I can turn left, I can turn right, I can do a combination of these things, and I can get predictable results out of it. Again, assuming none of these components have been destroyed. So I would say, if you're going to build a flying vehicle, that the rudders and the aerofoils are kind of necessary. Now, I've tried making things that fly. I've mentioned this in previous episodes with like the helium blocks and the hover blades and all these other things. Those let you lift the vehicle off the ground, but I would never really call them controlled flight. At one point, I'm going to make a hovercraft, and I've seen people do it, and they have good results with it, but I wasn't happy with the one that I built. But for actual flight, you really need the aerofoils and the rudders. Otherwise, you're just kind of in the air and not really in full control of what's going on. So that covers movement, covers our sensor suite, covers our weapons, covers some of our defenses in the electroplates. But now take a look at the superstructure of this vehicle. It's basically, again, using the armor core setup with these sort of blocky footballs split apart and stacked next to one another. The whole purpose, again, is to absorb as much damage into the hull as possible before it starts getting to the critical components, so that if we are taking fire, we can get out of the way, hopefully, theoretically, and survive before we start losing things that we don't want to lose. Now, the nature of the beast is that the guns are sort of at risk at all times. It's very easy to lose the guns I may at some point consider putting them up top and then using that as part of the strategy. Like when I'm doing a run to attack, I would orient myself so that the guns are effective and then pull up and get out of the way, protect the guns kind of thing. For now, I understand that these guys are vulnerable and they're not in the best place, but that's where they are. And at least I know, double check before you do an attack run on someone that you still have guns to shoot at them with. But the main thing here is we've actually got basically 2 layers of this armor core, so that the top section where the driver's seat is completely detached from this entire lower chassis. Like, in order to get to the driver's seat, you would have to hit with enough force to destroy all the blocks around here and up to there, and then blam, and then toast, and then done. Same thing around the other side. So realistically speaking, if you destroy my aircraft, it's because you destroyed everything else that was on it to begin with, and I deserve to be out of the match. So very, very effective. This armor core sort of idea is turning out to be more effective than I'd even really hoped at the beginning, just because when you see the vehicle start to fly apart, it's so structured and so controlled, the way the pieces fly off. It's actually really cool. So that's my flyer, the first iteration, and I'm just give you a little hint. Once this video is done and rendered and posted, this thing is getting torn apart, and we're going to do a whole new flyer, taking advantage of some of the things that I've learned along the way. So for the time being, let's hop into a couple of matches and see how this guy performs. Now, both of the matches we're going to be looking at take place on this map. I actually really like this map for either of my vehicles right now, because it's a really open map for my rail sled, so that it's not hard to find targets and it's not hard to find cover. And for an aerial vehicle, you can get an idea for the scope, how far you can see with this kind of thing. Now, I'm doing my best not to fly out ahead of my teammates. Like I said, I don't want all eyes on me at the start of a match when the enemy doesn't have anyone else to shoot at but me. As much electroplating and other things as I've got on this vehicle, it's still taking any kind of damage makes you nervous, because it doesn't take much to really mess you up, especially when you start losing key components. Now, I consider this vehicle kind of like a heavy support vehicle, and if that sounds sort of ambiguous and almost useless, you're right. It really is. You can see what I'm doing now. I'm basically harassing these ground units down on the ground near friendly forces, which can put a little bit of pressure on them and make them a little bit nervous and a little bit distracted, because when you're taking damage from multiple sources, it's a little bit nerve-wracking. But in the grand scheme of things, I don't consider that to be the reason to build a vehicle. Harassing with SMGs is the reason to pretend you don't know what it means to be a team player. It's basically what it works out to. I would like to see more guns on this vehicle, or I would like to see more potent guns on this vehicle, or I would like to see a build that was more suited to taking on air-to-air kind of scenarios, which I can manage, but if I'm as big as I am, flying up against plasma bombers is kind of dangerous. Now you can see I'm starting to take some real hits. And that's kind of the first indication that things are about to go sideways for us, because you can see I can maneuver, I can twist, and I can turn, and I can loop, and I can flop, and I can do whatever the hell I want. But eventually, if they are really determined to shoot at me, I'm going to start losing components. So there I've lost both rudders and one wing, and the vehicle is basically done for. You could see I was hoping that I would just stop right on the base and start capping, but I bounced off, and now I've got to try and control this aircraft to get it back onto the cap circle if I want to be of any use at all for the rest of the match. My guns are gone. Actually, no, they're not. There's 2 there. But I'm not really in a position to be using them to great effect. So it's a case of, just like trying to drive a vehicle with only 2 wheels, I can move. I can move in some cases fairly quickly, but being able to move exactly where I want to go is more or less impossible. And right now I'm trying to use the walls of the mountain here to give me that little bit of direction that I need to flop around and get headed where I need to go. It was an exercise in futility. I wasn't going to make you guys sit through the remaining 3 minutes of that, of me trying to get on the cap circle before we won. We actually did win that match, no thanks to me. This is the exact same vehicle, exact same configuration, no change whatsoever. But this one actually kind of shows off a little bit more of the armor core and what it brings to the table in terms of survivability. You can see I've got that whole undercarriage with guns and electroplates and all kinds of crap dangling that's supposed to be what makes this vehicle useful as anything other than a scout. A scout being... Apparently, there's a scout designation in the game. You can actually make a scout and have a vehicle called a scout, and all you have to do is have a vehicle with no weapons. I'm not going to put down that idea. I am going to say from my experience in World of Tanks, the role of a scout is a selective one, and I don't know if the maps are large enough and detailed enough that I would want to build just a scout craft. Now, that was a rail gun that just hit me, and look what's left of my vehicle. Is very uniform. It's entirely controllable. I've got both my rudders, I've got all 4 wings, I've got all 4 thrusters, I've got the electroplates on either side, and even the undercarriage of the vehicle is pretty uniform because that railgun shot took out the entire undercarriage of the vehicle. Any other aerial vehicle that I've seen that takes that kind of a hit from a railgun is no longer usable. They just don't survive. They've lost a critical component. They're not able to do anything. And while I was talking about a scout and how I would never want to be one, that's what I am right now, is a scout. I have no guns, but I'm fully mobile. It's actually kind of not a bad looking vehicle, but it's just a question as to how useful I can be flying around trying to spot things for my team if they're already pretty much got everything under control. And you can see everywhere I turn, all we see are blue nameplates, and that indicates my teammates are in pretty good shape. They're advancing towards the enemy cap circle, and I don't really have anything left to contribute. I found a plasma tank on this ridge that my teammates were already very familiar with, because the plasma tank, everyone sees the plasma bolts. And then there was this guy. If I had guns, I would have shot him down by now. But my teammates, you can see, they shot him once and he appears to have self-destructed. That's the vehicle. So that kind of gives you an idea of what I'm talking about when I say, I mean, we got one that flies, it's stable, it's maneuverable, it's survivable in a lot of situations. The first match that I showed you, we took a lot of hits before we were knocked out of commission. And in this case, we took a hell of a hit, and it actually left us with almost a new vehicle that was able to fly around and do pretty much anything you'd want a vehicle in this game to do, except for shoot at the enemy. That's where we're going to leave it. This next match that we got into was in the icy place, and it was one of those matches where you just kind of overextend a little bit and you get blasted up, and then the next thing you know, you're kind of sliding along the ground, not able to do anything. That's what it is. So the next episode, we're going to rebuild our aerial vehicle. We're going to rebuild it for function now that we've got an idea of what works and what doesn't. And then we're going to obviously take it into a match or two and see how it works. Hopefully better than this one. So if you want to be notified when I add that video, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel. You can also follow me and get notifications on social media, Google Plus and Twitter. Links for those are in the information section below the video. Please do leave your comments and feedback. They're important and I read them all. Thanks for watching, guys. And take care.